I'm Twyman, I'm Head of Political and Social Research at YouGov. For those of you that don't know, YouGov is a full-service research agency, and for those of you that don't speak robo-geek, that means we ask questions about everything under the sun, from pet food to pensions, and the all-important pet food pension questions. But I'm involved with the political and social research team, and I'm responsible for the team that has produced around about 1,400 polls this Parliament. And, for those of you that aren't aware, there's a general election coming up in just 7 days. This used to be so much easier. I'm a founding director of the company. Back in 2001, everyone knew who was going to win the election then. And in 2005, it was slightly more difficult. 2010 was tough. This time around, it's impossible. So I'm afraid if you come here tonight waiting to hear who I'm going to predict to be Prime Minister, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Though I can say it's going to be Ed Miliband, or David Cameron, or somebody else. I'm going to talk about where we are. I'm going to talk about where I think we may be going over the next 7 days. Then I'm going to talk a bit about housing policies and their implications. I want to start then with where we are and a simple fact. The world has changed. And by the world, I mean British politics, which is pretty much my world at the moment. This graph shows the decline of the two-party system. Go back to 1951, and more than 80% of the entire adult population, not the electorate, the entire adult population voted for one of the two main parties. And that figure has fallen steadily, with fluctuations along the way, to a point where in 2010, just over 40% of the adult population voted for one of those two main parties. The era of the two-party system is over. Instead, it has been replaced by a 3, 4, 5 multi-party system that we have at the moment. But what makes my job so difficult, and one of the reasons that I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, is that the electoral system is still very geared up for two parties. So we have a two-party electoral system and a multi-party political system. And that makes things rather tough. Here was the result from the last election. This shows the GB share on the left and then the number of seats on the right. Now, for those of you that weren't around, weren't paying attention, or perhaps have forgotten, last time around, really the only game in town was some sort of agreement between Liberal Democrats and Conservatives. You need 326, technically, for a majority in the House of Commons, and as you can see, that combination delivered that and more. Nothing else really would. And so, that was the only game in town. What has happened since then? Well, I call this the graph of disappointment. And it's called the graph of disappointment because everyone involved in it is disappointed in one way or another. At the top, you have the Labour Party. They're disappointed. At some points during this Parliament, they've been on 45% of the vote, but they've never been able to sustain it. Instead, they've dropped back and over the last couple of years have been gradually declining. A 45% strategy has turned to a 40% strategy, has turned to a 35% strategy, has turned to a, well, let's forget it, let's just get as many votes as we can strategy. So they're disappointed. On the other hand, you have the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are disappointed. The Conservatives are disappointed because, as we'll see in subsequent slides, the economy is doing well, people feel slightly better about themselves. Ed Miliband's not a massive success, and yet the Conservatives have never been able to be consistently ahead. Instead, for the last 2-3 years, they've been fluctuating between sort of 30 and 35%. Never really being able to sustain any kind of growth, and stuck in the position they've been in since the omni-shambles budget of March 2012. Then you have the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems are really disappointed. Lib Dems are really disappointed because they've lost a lot of voters. Their support has fallen away, and it hasn't moved for years and years. 23% of the national vote, 24% of the GB vote, now around about 8 to 10, battling the Green Party at points for the all-important fourth place in British politics prize. They've taken a lot of hits and nothing has moved that. And then you have UKIP. And UKIP are disappointed for a host of reasons. Of course, a critic would suggest that UKIP are disappointed because it's not 1950. But I'm not going to make that joke because I'm completely non-partisan. And that would be unfair on them. Instead, UKIP are disappointed because despite the massive gains that they've made, despite getting only 3% at the last election, and now 15, sometimes 18%, despite the fact they've won local elections, finished top in European elections, and won their first 2 Westminster MPs, albeit from conversions. Despite all of that, they're disappointed because they're not going to win many seats next week. If they're lucky, they'll get 5. 3 is probably more realistic. Nigel Farage will not be storming the gates of Downing Street, at least not with permission. And we will not see the People's Army rising. So they're disappointed as well. And so this, our most recent voting intention, shows what has essentially been the story since the start of the campaign, and has essentially been the story since the start of the year. And that story is, neither of the 2 main parties has anything like a statistically viable lead, and neither of them has anything like the kind of share of the vote they need to achieve a majority. So we're looking, potentially, at hung parliament territory. UKIP have dropped back a bit, the Lib Dems have gone up slightly, but nothing really much has changed. The Greens, they've fallen back, but I don't think that's necessarily any surprise. So, in terms of issues, what are we looking at? For some of the writing might be quite small. So, when you ask people what's the most important issue facing the country, and ask them to choose their top 3 from the list, this is what you get. The economy, health, top, immigration in 3rd place. Now, immigration is important, but when you then ask people what's the most important issue facing you and your family, it drops right back. Combine the 2, and you can see what are the 2 main issues of this election. The economy and health. Why? Because they're important to people, but also because they happen to represent the home turf of 2 main parties, and so that's what they'll concentrate on. Immigration falls right back. It's a problem for other people. And I've circled housing there, so you can see. It's a second-order issue. That doesn't mean it's not important, it means it's not as important to people as health and the economy. But there's a lot of variation in housing as an issue. When you look at age groups, you can see when you ask people what's the most important issue facing you and your family, the figure for 18 to 24-year-olds rises significantly. And has risen significantly since the start of the campaign. When you divide things up by region, you can see as an issue facing the country and facing the family, it rises significantly in London. And so there is a lot of variation in that. When you ask people who's the best party on housing, Labour are ahead. They're ahead by some distance. So they're the people that are trusting on it. But it's by no means overwhelming. And you have a lot of people, 1 in 5, who say they don't know. So that's where we are at the moment. Next question is, where are we going? Where are we going between now and next Thursday? Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly. But what I do know is the questions that we're looking at with these few days remaining as we enter, as Alex Ferguson would describe it, squeaky bum time. What are the questions that we're looking at? Well, the first question we're looking at is what will happen to UKIP? What will happen to UKIP? 3% at the last general election, 12% in polls now. Where will they fall? And what's happened to all those people who have switched to UKIP? What do UKIP converts look like? Well, this is what they look like. The largest group by some distance are former Conservatives. Will they stay or will they go? And where will they stay and where will they go? Second question, what will happen to the SNP? You may have seen a poll that another company produced today predicting that the SNP will win every single seat in Scotland. If the SNP win every single seat in Scotland, let's all meet back here and I'll buy us all drinks. It's not going to happen. What do SNP converts look like though? Pretty similar picture, but this time the largest group are from Labour. So Labour are losing out in Scotland, UKIP are forcing the Conservatives to lose out in England. Next question then, what will happen to the Lib Dems? What will happen to the Lib Dems? 24% of the British vote last time, round about sort of 9% now. What's happened to all those people who have left? Well, this is what they look like. This is what Lib Dem defectors look like. It's a more complicated picture, but 2 important things. Well, maybe 2.5 important things. Firstly, 19% of people say they don't know. They still don't know who they're going to vote for with a week to go, and that is a lot of people. Secondly, the largest group, but not overwhelmingly so, are going to Labour. So Labour, yes, they're losing out in Scotland, but in England, they're particularly, if you like, inflated by the Lib Dems. Will they stay or will they go back to their old party? And then you have 11% of people that have switched from the Lib Dems to UKIP. And that may seem counterintuitive. It's really not. Because those are the protesters. Those are the people dissatisfied, distrusting, disapproving of the political class, the political institutions, political parties, politicians. And UKIP, the SNP and the Greens have been very effective at mopping up support from those people. They didn't create the wave, but they're doing a very good job of riding it. Some of those people used to vote Liberal, and now they're voting UKIP. And so we know they're going to lose a lot of votes, but it's not all bad news for the Lib Dems, because they benefit from what's called incumbency factor. And again, for those of you who don't speak Robo-Geek, incumbency factor means that if you have a Lib Dem MP, more than any other group, you're likely to hold on to that MP. They get a boost in local voting because they work hard on the ground, traditionally, because they do better at a local level, traditionally. Now, we're not sure if historical precedent will hold in this election, but we assume it will, despite the fixed-term parliament, despite the coalition. We assume that historical precedent will hold, and so they'll probably get between sort of maybe 20 and 30 seats. And there's another group that benefits from MP incumbency. MP incumbency more generally, who benefits from that? New MPs. For reasons that we don't quite understand, in this country, when we have a new MP, we kind of think, well done you, have another go. And we give them a boost. So MPs that joined in 2010 get a boost of between 5, 8, something like that %. And that can be crucial in a lot of areas. And who has the most new MPs? Conservatives, by some distance, even though some of those guys have decided that after achieving their lifetime ambition, they don't want it after all and they're resigning. So, there's that. Next question then, what about the leaders? What effects will leaders have on the campaign? Tomorrow night in Leeds is the last of the, in inverted commas, leaders' debates. They haven't made a huge difference this time. If you look at the leadership ratings, you can see that for Miliband and Clegg particularly, the ratings have picked up significantly, but they were at a pretty low base. And it's worth pointing out that 0 is about halfway down that chart. And so for 1 week recently, David Cameron managed positive ratings. +1 for 1 week. The others haven't managed that. Ed Miliband's doing better. It turns out he's not completely functionally incompetent. Expectations for him were spectacularly low, and he's managed to exceed those. And he is benefiting as a result. Nick Clegg still behind though. Why are leaders important? I'll tell you why. Because most people, and I'll lay into a secret here, most people, not the kind of people who come to an event on a sunny evening to listen to the election, but most people actually don't pay much attention to politics. If you're lucky, 1 or 2 weeks every 5 years. And they really don't pay much attention to policies. Instead, they're interested in the broad stories about the parties, the grand narratives, as we sometimes say, the stories that we tell ourselves and each other about those parties. Who can we trust? Who can be effective? Who can do right by me? And one of the things that we use to develop those ideas are cues taken from the leaders. So the leaders are important, and David Cameron's ahead. And it's very unusual to come from behind on this to win an election. What about the economy then? That's the next important question. We saw a bit of a surprisingly low growth forecast today, but I don't think it will make much difference. People's expectations of the economy are important. And when you ask people who's the best party on the economy, you can see Conservatives are ahead by some distance, and that gap is generally growing. Now, it's very unusual to come from behind on this to win an election, and it has never been the case that people have come from behind on leadership and this economic measure, personal economic expectations, to win on an election. Will it happen this time? We'll have to see. When you ask people about their financial situation, you can see that actually it's more complicated than simply people are getting better. They don't think things are getting better, they think things are getting less worse. The red line is people's expectations over the next 12 months, their household economic situation will get worse. That number is decreasing, but the number that thinks it's getting better is not growing substantially. When you distill this down into the all-important feel-good factor, you can see that things are definitely moving in the right direction, but 0 is the top of that chart. So people are getting less pessimistic. They're not actually getting optimistic yet. And whereas this looks like good news for the Conservatives, and it certainly is, they do have an Achilles heel. And that is one of fairness. Because yes, people think that the situation is getting better. People think the Conservatives are the best party to deal with it, but they feel that the changes that are taking place are unfair. A majority think that, and that figure hasn't changed throughout the entire Parliament. And that's how we arrive at this situation at the moment, where essentially the entire campaign has come down to 3 main arguments. Both parties are pushing the first argument. It's an idea that you have a choice. You have a choice. You can either hold your nose and vote for one of the 2 main parties, the 2 parties that actually can deliver a government, or you can cut it off to spite your face and vote for one of the others and let the other guy in. And both the parties are pushing that every single day and have been for some time. During the Conservative conference speech, David Cameron said, "Go to bed with Nigel, wake up with Ed." A horrible image on many levels. That's an example of his argument. So they're both pushing that idea. The Conservatives, in addition, are saying you have a simple choice. You have a simple choice between competency and chaos. Our competency on the economy, or the chaos of the Labour government and Ed Miliband. In contrast to that, Labour is saying, no, it's not about that, it's a simple choice, yes, but it's a choice between fairness and inequality. A government for all, or government for Dave's mates in the cities. Which one will win out? The answers are here. And let me say what I think. What will happen to UKIP? I think they will fall back, particularly in the margins. In the safe seats, where you can vote with impunity because they weigh the vote, it's not so much of a problem. You can easily register your protest and send a message about what you think of our society and vote UKIP or vote for one of the other parties. But in the marginals, I think it will make a difference. Why? Because actually, people don't have a good grasp of where UKIP stand on the economy or health or these important issues, and that's a bit of a problem. But also, they don't have the strength in depth. Yeah, they've got Nigel Farage, who's very good, but then from sort of 2 to 5 on the squad list, you can rely on Susan Evans and Douglas Carswell and Patrick O'Flynn, all strong performers. 5 to 10, you're in reckless territory, literally reckless territory. People who become racist when they get tired. And then from 10 onwards, you've got through Bloom land, where apparently it's acceptable to use terms like bongo. So that's a problem for them. So I expect them to pull back. I don't expect the SNP to pull back much. Why? Because they're neutralising the hold your nose and cut it off, spite your face argument by saying, hey guys, vote for us. Vote SNP, it's the best possible way of voting Labour. You get a Labour Prime Minister in Westminster, but you get the best possible people fighting for you in Scotland. And we won't be influenced by a central London party telling us what to do. We're our own people. We'll fight for Scotland and we'll fight with Labour in Westminster. And it's a good argument. Lib Dems, I think those people who have left the Lib Dems are the least likely to go back. I think they're stuck, and I think Labour will benefit from that. And so what does this mean? What does this mean for the ultimate question? The ultimate question. Who's going to win? What does that even mean? Most votes, most seats? Probably who becomes Prime Minister. And how does that happen? You get 326 in government, right? Easy, or not? Let's look at a scenario. And I should stress, possibly for legally binding reasons. This is not a prediction, or a projection, or an estimation, or anything like that. It's just the scenario of what could potentially happen and how the numbers might fall out. Let's say the Conservatives get 290, probably higher than they're actually going to get. Let's say Labour get 270, probably about right. Lib Dems, we said between 20 and 30, so we'll split the difference in 25. UKIP 5, probably more than they'll get. SNP 35, probably less than they'll get. How do the numbers work out in terms of actual negotiations? Well, if you're Conservatives, you start with 290, you phone up Nick Clegg and you say, hey, let's get the band back together again. That gives you 25, 315. You might go with that. You might see if you can get through. And you might see if you can line up with UKIP for another 5, because a UKIP Lib Dem coalition can only work well. And then you might say the DUP, you might give the DUP a call. I assume they answer the phone shouting no. That takes you to 328 and just over the line. Now you can say, oh, the Sinn Féin don't see it, and the Speaker seat, etc., yeah. But 326, look at the numbers. Labour, on the other hand, Labour get 270, 20 fewer seats. They phone Nick Clegg and they said, hey Nick, can we speak to the leader please? And he says, yes, I'll pass you over. 25 seats from them, plus the 35 from the SNP. Lib Dem, and Ed Miliband becomes Prime Minister. Maybe. But we'll have to see. In terms of housing policies, various parties have promoted housing policies, and some of them have been successful, some of them have been less successful. I want to go through some of them in turn. Firstly, house building. 1 in 6 voters says that they are more likely to vote for a party that supports house building. There's a recognition that the number of houses has to be increased. That should not be a surprise to anyone in this room. But there's recognition the number should be increased. When you look at the mansion tax, and I should say we didn't call it the mansion tax in the question, but you know what I mean. When we look at the specific policies for Labour, 61% of people support this, and it feeds into their inequality arguments. Contrast that with the right to buy. 28% of people thought that was a good idea, and that was the flagship policy of the Conservative Manifesto. So not great news for them. If you'd like to know more, we've got a question time after this, but you can also look at the data we have in the public domain at www.yougovarchive.com. We have syndicated research reports on a whole host of subjects relating to your areas. We also do omnibus research questions, so we can run things very quickly. However, there are also ad hoc research studies available. But if I wanted to know, if I really wanted to know who was going to be the next Prime Minister, I'd follow me on Twitter. And so my details are here along with my email. Thank you very much, and let's see what happens in 7 days.